Jack the Ripper is one of the most haunting figures in human history. The killer who terrorized Victorian England and remained undetected. His name and image have become legendary and are tightly woven into world culture, turning into an endless source of inspiration for books, films, comics, and games. No other criminal can boast such a legacy. The zest is added by the fact that no one will ever know for sure who was hiding under this name. However, this does not stop people from building theories and looking for new evidence. Today we will lift the veil of secrecy and tell you the most interesting theories about who the elusive maniac was. England, late 19th century, Whitechapel area is the most crime-ridden area in London. Dirty slums, crumbling rooming houses and hostels, mostly emigrants, beggars, and vagabonds live here. The streets are drowning in dirt, drunkenness, and prostitution. There's nothing else to do here. Robberies of violence every day, as a matter of course. It was Whitechapel, between August 30th and November 9th, where 5 brutal murders attributed to Jack the Ripper were committed. All the victims were prostitutes, drunkards, all of them had their throats cut, and then they were brutally mutilated, removing their internal organs. All but the last, Mary Jane Kelly, were over 40 years old. 25-year-old Mary was killed in the room she was renting. This allowed the killers to disperse, especially because he quickly tormented the rest in the nearest gateways and ran away. After her murder, as suddenly as Jack the Ripper appeared, he disappeared. Witnesses claim that shortly before the death they saw the women with a mustachioed man of about 40, wearing shabby clothes and speaking with a slight accent. After the second murder on September 25, Scotland Yard received a letter in which the killer introduced himself as Jack the Ripper, teasing the police in a mocking manner. After publication in the newspaper, literally hundreds of such letters poured in. Of these, 2 more were recognized as real, a postcard received on October 1 after the double murder, and a letter dated October 16, entitled From Hell. Unlike the previous 2, it was written terribly, clumsily, and illiterately. But it came with a small package, half a human kidney. The second, according to the killer, he ate. The brutal massacres incredibly excited the whole of England. They were widely publicized and made a lot of noise. Every journalist and home defector tried to conduct their own investigation and blame someone. It even got to the point that an actor who very naturally played a maniac in a theater production that was popular at that time came under suspicion. You must understand that at the end of the 19th century there was no question of any medical examination, fingerprints, or even taking photographs of the crime scene. The case was based solely on eyewitness testimony, and not all of us could be trusted. It also didn't help that the various police departments investigating the cases refused to cooperate with each other and did not share information. Investigators believed that the killer was a butcher or a doctor. About 2,000 people were interviewed and about 80 were detained. But no one was ever charged due to lack of evidence. And after some time it was discovered that most of the case materials had disappeared without a trace. American Irishman Francis Tumblety is one of the most popular candidates for the role of Jack the Ripper among most researchers. He was a charlatan doctor who performed illegal abortions at home and sold homemade potions that didn't work. Throughout his childhood, he was oppressed and humiliated by his mother, and when he grew up, he married a woman who turned out to be a prostitute. All this made Tumblety a confirmed misogynist and principled homosexual. He often said that he would rather treat a woman to poison than let her come to his table. And his friends recalled that long before his arrival in London. He kept a collection at home because of alcoholized female wombs, claiming that it's not finished yet. In 1988 he came to London, where he was often caught for indecent behavior with men. After the last murder, he was arrested along with many other suspects. The American police, upon request, sent Scotland Yard a description of Tumblety as a quarrelsome and violent person. But there was no evidence of his guilt, so after 3 days Francis was released on bail and immediately fled to France, from where he sailed to the United States. His arrival, by a strange coincidence, coincided with the beginning of a series of brutal murders of prostitutes in New York, where Tumblety had just settled. However, no one connected these two events, and Francis died calmly of his own death in 1903. It would seem that everything is clear, the case can be closed, but there are two nuances. First of all, Tabloty was the proud owner of a bushy, well-groomed mustache. It was difficult for a person with such a sign to blend in with the crowd unnoticed. And secondly, there are statistics that exclusively men become victims of murders of homosexuals. In the 60s of the 20th century, a very entertaining conspiracy theory appeared. The murder is linked to Queen Victoria's grandson Prince Albert Victor. His wayward character was a problem for the entire royal family. One day he declared that a commoner gave birth to his daughter and now they would happily live as a normal family. The Queen ordered the prince to be tracked down and brought to the palace. And his wife was placed in a mental hospital, where the girl was methodically driven crazy. The unwanted child was left with a nanny, the same Mere Kelly, who lives in a poor area. She told her prostitute friend about the royal bastard. The woman couldn't come up with anything smarter than trying to blackmail the royal family for the sake of a beautiful life. But what happened to them in the end is what happens to anyone who tries to play similar games with the royal family. After all, every Englishman knows, the crown always wins. Among the possible murderers, the name of the impressionist artist Walter Sickert, who taught drawing to the same Prince Albert, often appears. At the time of the murder he was alive in Whitechapel and using local prostitutes as models, of course. Be that as it may, Sickert has two suspiciously macabre paintings, Jack the Ripper's bedroom and the Camden Town murders. The latter is strikingly reminiscent of the murder scene of Mary Kelly, and contains details that were not made public at that time, which means that Sickert simply could not have known them. This may indicate that if the artist was not a murderer, he at least knew more than he could say. In May 2006, an analysis of saliva on stamps from Jack the Ripper letters yielded a striking result: a woman wrote them, or at least simply licked the stamps. A similar idea was voiced by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and he is no stranger to crime investigation. The hypothesis was founded at night. Not one of the prostitutes was raped. Buttons from a woman's shoe were found near the second victim, and remains, skirts and hats were found in the fireplace in Mary Kelly's room. Clearly they didn't belong to her. Mary Percy, who a few years after Jack's appearance, was hanged for the brutal murder of her lover's wife and daughter, is often included in the ranks of the Rippers. However, many criminals of that time were unreasonably called Jack the Ripper. Elizabeth Williams, wife of the royal Dr. John Williams, also came under suspicion. The royal family pops up again, coincidence? In 2011, British detective Trevor Marriott, bored in retirement, decided to conduct his own investigation into this case. He suggested something that no one had thought about before him. Whitechapel is located near the docks, so perhaps Jack the Ripper was a sailor. This explains the gaps between murders and his sudden disappearance. Marriott studied many documents of that time and was surprised to discover that in addition to the London and New York ones known to him, a series of brutal unsolved murders of prostitutes took place in Germany, Switzerland, Nicaragua, and various American cities. On August 31, 1884, the last such incident occurred. While dealing with the victim, the criminal did not know that her son was sleeping in the next room, who heard the sounds of murder and began to call for help. The killer, covered in blood, was detained while trying to escape from the crime scene. He had a knife with a blade 15 centimeters long. It was the German Karl Feigenbaum. But while traveling around the States, he used different names. During a search of his room, letters were found addressed to Anton San, presumably his real name. San was a sailor on the merchant ship Riker, which was docked in London port in 1988 at the time of Jack the Ripper's appearance. On April 27, 1896, Karl Feigenbaum was executed in the electric chair. He did not admit his guilt until the very end and took all his secrets with him to the grave. After his death, his lawyer expressed fears that Feigenbaum was the Ripper. He admitted to him that he really lived in London at the time of the murders, and also talked about his strange illness, from which he loses control, a growing desire to kill and maim any girl nearby. Alas, the lawyer got into trouble for revealing his client's secret, and a few years later he shot himself in the park, becoming the latest victim of the alleged Jack the Ripper. Was there a Ripper? And of course, we cannot completely ignore the version that there was no Jack the Ripper at all. To begin with, the 5 murders attributed to the Ripper were only part of the 11 solved murders of prostitutes in Whitechapel between 88 and 91. The authenticity of Jack's letters was disputed even when they appeared. The police believed that the journalists were simply chasing hype. Even the very fact of disemboweling the victims may have been greatly exaggerated. It is likely that the victims' internal organs were already lost in the morgue, with the help of dishonest pathologists who sold parts of the bodies of the dead on the black market. Such blatant cases occurred quite often. It was such a time, everyone was spinning around as best they could. Perhaps, with such demonstrative murders, numerous Whitechapel pimps simply intimidated and punished their free prostitutes. In any case, Jack the Ripper did what many activists of the time could not do. Drew attention to the horrific living conditions of the bottom of the English regions. After the murders, the government began to take serious measures to improve the standard of living of Whitechapel and similar areas. Locals joked for a long time that in order for the authorities to start working, all they had to do was kill a couple of women.